Thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Avery Jackson. I'm a board-certified neurosurgeon. I practice in Michigan. My public figure page is draveryjackson.com. You can check that out. It also talks about the tripart being, and it's so important to keep that in mind when we make medical decisions and decisions about health. So with that, I appreciate this time with you. And what I was asked to do was to kind of step in and just go over some of the basics of the immune system, and then we'll, move on to some of the other topics. So this is amazing, right? Okay, God has, from two cells old, the sperm and the egg that fuse together at conception, has given us an amazing immune system. And the immune system, it basically, as we're forming these cells, these cell lines, these germ cells, and these are cells that can produce whole organs or whole systems, and those divide while we're still in our mother's womb. And from there, we develop T cells and B cells in our bone marrow. And then from the bone marrow, we go on to now become really more complex in terms of our innate systems and then our adaptive immune systems. So the first defense in the immune system in general is going to be all of our surfaces, our skin surface. There's a huge barrier, not only a literal barrier, but also there are chemicals and proteins that we have within our skin that help to kill bacteria and viruses, right? And that's why it's so important to wash your hands and things like of that nature, right? What's interesting is that our skin also, it sheds, and when it sheds, it's killing different forms of pathogens or bacteria that would stick to our skin and eventually try to enter through our mouth or our eyes and what have you. So then when we look at our innate immune system, this is really, really fascinating. Okay, here's the thing. We have these B cells and these T cells that understand that we're in an environment where there are going to be a lot of threats all the time. So this concept that we're running into nowadays it gives us a sense as though we're almost like sterile beings, like there's no bacteria, there are no viruses on us, there are no viruses in our atmosphere, and then all of a sudden we are faced with all of these viruses that now we have to come to grips with. But understand that there is something called the human virome. So basically there are more viruses and bacteria in and on you than your own cells, okay? So then you ask the question, if it's true that there are more viruses in and on you than your own cells, how come we don't get sick? And the answer is because God knew this, and he called us the healed, not only in terms of the redemptive work of Jesus, but also in terms of what he put in us, because he knew that throughout our lives, we would run into an environment of bacteria and viruses, and so he has a plan for us. And so with that, we mentioned the skin, and in terms of the innate, we mentioned some of the cells, the B and T cells, and then we can break those down further, which we'll do in just a second. And then we have the innate immune system, the adaptive, which is once a new virus or bacteria is encountered by us, we create a defense mechanism for that next encounter, okay? So going back to the innate immune system, one of the biggest pieces I'll mention so that I don't put anybody to sleep is something called the natural killer cell, okay? This is a fascinating component of our immune system. There are studies that show that the natural killer cell, it basically has two main functions. One is it kills cancer cells, and the other is it kills viruses. And that's what it does all day long, okay? So while you're sleeping, the natural killer cell is doing its thing. Why is this important? And especially today, why is this important? It's because we know, and there is data that shows that when we are at peace, we're healthy physically, we're healthy emotionally, the natural killer cell functions optimally. Okay? So, and I'll give all of you an example of when the natural killer cell doesn't function normally, and that all of you will know right away. And that is the common cold sore. Okay? And so how does that work? And this will give you some insight into the natural killer cell function, and then also insight into how complex we're made. Okay? And that is that the only time that you ever see a problem with cold sores around the mouth or oral area is when there's stress, when there's fatigue, or you're extremely tired, right? And there's some worry. That's when you see the natural killer cell. That's when you see that the cold sore comes out. And that's the only time, as long as your immune system is functioning normally otherwise. Obviously, if you're immunocompromised for other reasons, medications, what have you, that's kind of a different story. But in general functioning, that's the only time that you see the cold sore. Well, what's happening? It's partly physical. Your body is overtaxed, it's overwhelmed, it's not getting the energy that it needs, and so that's one of the breakdowns in the natural killer cell. But a big component that we've really not touched on in basic medicine and science is your emotional state and how that affects your natural killer cell function. And so studies have shown that people who have depression, and when their faith level decreases, what happens? They tend to have more upper respiratory tract infections than those who aren't. And why? It's because of the natural killer cell function decreasing. So this is an example that all of you can immediately recognize and understand at kind of a macroscopic level, okay? So that's something I just want to mention, because in this time, it's really important to have and keep the relationships, and it's important to make sure that that you keep your faith up, because that's going to affect your natural killer cell function and ultimately affect in how you fight these infections. Okay, so that's a super important one. Along with that is now we talk about the antibody or the adaptive response. So when a virus enters you, okay, your natural killer cell and your T and B cells will immediately attack that substance, okay? But then your body is also creating a library of different variations on a theme, so that if that enemy returns, or if a variation of that enemy returns, you have an army waiting at the door to attack it. Now understand, people use basic terminology like catching a virus. But viruses and bacteria, as I mentioned earlier from the human virome example, come and go through us all the time. So it's so important to make sure our immune systems are strong, as all of you know. That's why you take care of your bodies, right? So in this case, when we speak specifically about the coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2, we're speaking about a virus. I'm not going to go into detail specifically about the virus, but what I will say is your immune system has a mechanism in place, as I mentioned, that once you're introduced to it, it's going to go to work, okay? Now, once it goes to work, it's going to kill the virus based on where it enters you in terms of the mouth area and the nasopharyngeal area. That's the biggest. And it docks on these ACE2 receptors. And then it goes to the lung and the GI tract. That's usually the most common areas where we find this particular pathogen. And so we have our T cells and B cells killing it, and they will also detect that there's a surface antigen, right, the S protein, and that's something unusual. So immediately your immune system says, wait a minute, that's unusual in that cell. I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to kill the cell and the invader in it. okay? And that's the innate system. And while that's occurring, you're building up your library, and it's a huge library, especially for those who are exposed to any of the viruses and they've not had any other substances, like the mRNA technology, for instance. Your body will immediately fight this virus, and then it creates a library that is really exhaustive. So understand that when you've been exposed to the virus and you get through that, now your adaptive immune system is ready to go for the next time you will encounter it, okay? And that's going to be your antibodies. So we have many different antibodies that form in complex species, IgG, IgA, IgM. So in a nutshell, as a virus comes in, now that you've already been exposed, now that you already have natural immunity, which by the way is durable and long-lasting, your IgA will move forward, and those antibodies will attack any mucosal surface area in the nose or the mouth, as viruses will land on those areas. Your IgG and IgM are going to be working more in your blood and your other areas, liquid areas within your body, and also doing the same thing in terms of attacking specific complexes in the virus and on the virus. And so it's really important to understand that if your immune system isn't working appropriately, then that process I just mentioned can break down at stages. So one would say, well, okay, then what about vaccines? So I am not an anti-vaxxer per se, but I do believe in our God-given immune system. I know it works and what it can do. And so if I feel that my immune system is compromised because I'm over the age of 65 or 70 and I have a bunch of different issues, then I consider maybe giving it some help. Below that time, I don't consider giving it help other than my vitamin D3 and making sure that I'm healthy, I'm eating right, and that my faith level is high, and I explain to you why that's important, okay? So with all that being said, we are understanding now that in general, the vaccines work when it's a proven vaccine, which usually takes anywhere from 4 to 8 years of safety study, that some vaccines can potentially basically just help make your immune system get revved up so it has more guards ready to go for the next encounter. Thanks. So anyway, in a nutshell, the point is that your God-given immune system is long-lasting, it kills on contact, and it has a library that can also kill all the variations that may approach you in the future.